George, hello, how are you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good too. Thank you for joining us. Uh, we're starting these videos by asking contributors to identify themselves and tell us a little bit about their work. Would you mind doing that, please?
Of course, here we go. My name is George. I guess my credentials have been that I was in a few Edwards Boys productions in my school in Edwards the Sixth in Stratford. Those plays include Galatea, Lady's Trial, Grobiana's Nuptials, Summer's Last Will and Testament. Uh, were a few of them, and then later at university, at Bristol University, I went on to direct a production of Galatea. So I guess those are the things that we might want to talk about today.
Yeah, great. Those are quite some credentials. I can't think of many people on the planet who have a working knowledge of that combination of plays on stage.
Yeah, I guess I've been surrounded by people who've who've had that, so for me it's quite normal. But I guess it isn't. I guess.
Definitely not. It's wonderful knowledge base that you have. So I'm looking forward to capturing it. So I guess you've just gone then from being in a school company working with those plays, working as an actor, to being the person who's not only directing but having to pitch this play. You know, you've moved from a world where everyone knows these plays, as you just said, to a world in which a lot of people will be going, "What the hell is Galatea?" Can you tell us a bit about the experience of moving out of the world that you're in, which is so open to early modern, not just early modern drama, but weird early modern drama, to a group of people who, for very good reasons, are not familiar with that world?
Of course, I think in university, people are often split into two very different camps. The one type of people who would absolutely love the idea of doing a Shakespeare play, but they would only do a Hamlet or a Macbeth, and they absolutely love doing that way more than the audience would probably enjoy watching it. But that was their passion. And the other type of people who just want to keep a million miles away from that, and for understandable reasons, they've seen them before or been in them and didn't think there was anything new to be learned or anything interesting that would come from doing a production. And I thought that kind of when we came, it was my third year. I wanted to do something that I was passionate about. So I knew that Galatea was a play that played with gender. It spoke to kind of identity and sexual identity and gender identity, and it really tackled a lot of the issues that we were talking about on campus, and it was relevant. Because it was an early modern play, I kind of wanted to share my passion and get other people involved, and to see that we don't have to be doing something that's been done loads and loads of times. Actually, we ourselves, even a small university, can create something new and exciting. And that was kind of, I think my passion carried it through. I hope, and I think that when it actually came to pitching the play, I remember kind of sitting in the committee room, and people kind of they rejected it out of hand straight away, and I got quite defensive, and I was like, well why? And they're just like, the language, it's going to be too much, it's not going to be something that people want to see. And I kind of demanded that we do a read through, and it was kind of the theme of the Tyrus and Galatea at the beginning, and I kind of pulled out my northern voice and all the jokes, and kind of I remembered it from when we did it, and kind of and made it funny and made them laugh in the room, and it kind of went from there. I think I gained their trust because I made them laugh, and I think that's how it happened, and that's how it started.
Great, thank you. So, for the benefit of people who do not know this play at all, how would
Yeah,
you how would you describe it? How would you pitch it to a new audience?
of course. So it's a Greek myth set in Hull, where I think so. Um, there's a village, and the village is cursed by Neptune. That I can't remember how many years, but every 10 years or so, the most beautiful virgin in a village must be sacrificed, or the village will be flooded. And there's gods, there's Cupid, there's Venus, there's Diana. They're all kind of roaming about and causing havoc in amongst these worlds of humans. And kind of the play centers around a girl called Galatea, and another girl called Philida, who have to dress as boys and and conceal themselves. And the play kind of plays around with gender in that way, and kind of obviously originally it was boys playing girls playing boys, and it's kind of it does in many ways throughout all of it, I think sticks a middle finger up at gender really, and just kind of plays with it and pushes it as far as it can go. So yeah, that's how I describe the play. I don't know, you're much more of an expert than me, but that's how I would describe it.
That's a great starting point. I think it's really helpful. Thank you. And I wasn't in the room with you when the play was actively putting people off, but having worked with Lily myself, I'm aware that the language on the page often looks very hostile and strange. And it's amazing how quickly it takes life the moment you start reading it aloud and or performing it and working with it on stage. And there's a whole bunch of other reasons why Lily looks very different to the kind of model many of us have in our heads of early modern drama, which is Shakespeare, very male, written in blank verse, and Lily's writing in prose, often for predominantly female cast of characters, and also writing wonderfully short plays, whereas Shakespeare's constantly testing everyone's bladders. Lily's someone who gets in and gets out really quickly of the theatre. Yeah, so does that make sense to you as an account of what might be putting people off? And also, do you have a sense of what then got people excited about it, other than you being hilarious?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, okay. I'm sorry I said that. It's not.
No. I'm not saying that's what you said. Sorry, I didn't mean to make that a negative.
Well, that was
in addition to you being hilarious, what was going on?
Well, yeah, it was definitely the main reason. But other than that, I think what put people off was the prose. It does look like big chunks of text on the page, which I think when people kind of, verse, it's got a lot of language and then that people wouldn't understand. But I think because it's broken down into these kind of shorter lines, people, I think it's easier to swallow almost, I think. And especially the beginning of Galatea, it's these massive long speeches which could be dry, and it's a lot of scene setting and someone just dumping a whole load of context on the audience in that play in particular, which I know from the other Lily plays I've seen, that seems to be a bit of a theme, maybe. I don't know, where kind of he does create these worlds that are fantastic, but in order to do that, there's a lot of emphasis on someone painting that picture, and that, I think, put people off because it's a hard thing to do. However, Lily is such a talented writer, in my opinion, that with a good actor, you can paint that picture so easily, because it's just this rich and wonderful world inhabited by just crazy characters. And I think as you go forward and picture all of these characters individually, there's so much scope to do such hilarious things with them, and they haven't been done before, and you don't feel like you're copying someone else. That I think people really got behind it, and people like playing like reversing gender. People like kind of the idea of drag. Obviously, is very much in vogue, and kind of when I first pitched the play, I think I led with that and kind of talked about how a lot of the humor would come from reversing genders. I think in the end, not much humor came from that. It wasn't really a source of jokes, and that's not really what we found funny. If anything, that was what we found interesting, and I think the play definitely started off as pushing the comedy elements, and by the last performance, it still had that, but it was a lot more.
A lot more.
Well, just a lot more. I think that it was it really challenged. I think it really challenged people's concepts of, and it challenged my concepts of kind of what was funny about gender, and I think a lot of it just, I don't really know how to describe it really, but it did. There's just a lot in it, and a lot that play, and kind of in terms of kind of the journey that we as actors came through it. Kind of one of the actors actually came out as trans halfway through the performance, and I think it was a big discovery for them, and they actually played the character of Diana, who is this kind of, it definitely, when we did it in Edward's Boys, it was someone playing a woman, but really pushing those masculine elements of femininity, and the kind of humor came from the fact that it was very obviously a man playing a woman with kind of unshaved armpits, and it was fantastic and really was fun in that way. when we came to do it, I had that image in my mind, but I actually cast someone who played Diana in a very fluid way. And rather than it being kind of one gender or another quite clearly and kind of heightening that for comic effect, instead we just completely blurred the lines, and it really worked. And that was, I think, for me, the most interesting part of the play. It was not pushing gender to one extreme or another. Instead, it was a blurring it.
Yeah, thank you. There's lots of really rich, exciting, complex things emerging from this conversation. So I might just pause and summarize a few of them, if that's all right.
Of course.
And again, for people who are new to the play, one of the reasons it's triggering these questions about gender and sexuality, as you say, you've got a boy actor in the play that Lily's writing, and in the production he's thinking about, there's a boy actor playing a female character who is forced to dress as a boy in order to be safe. And Lily then has the two girls dressed as boys fall in love with each other. And by Act 3, he's working quite hard to suggest that they are having some form of physical and or sexual contact. And by the end of that, rather than turning around and going, oops, as a kind of cis normative production might expect us to, or a heterosexual normative production might expect us to, these two girls want to get married. And the play is really interested in playing around with the gender and sexuality issues, as you say, that predicament raises. I'm really interested in what you're telling us about how the play changed, not just in rehearsal, but during performances. And finally, I don't know if there might be politics talking about this, so feel free to go wherever works for you. But I wonder what it's like to shift from performing this play in a school production with boys ranging in age, but that presumably enables some kinds of readings of the play and discourages others, as opposed to doing it as a university production. And I'm asking that question both because I'm nosy and interested in what that was like for you, but also from a historical perspective. This is a playwright working with a children's company, as opposed to someone like Shakespeare working with an adult company. So there you go. I've thrown loads of ideas at you, and you're welcome to take any of them. But yeah, tell us more.
Course, I think it kind of dealing with the last one first, maybe. I think one of the things that's very easy to do as a boys' company, especially boys as at younger ages, is go very close to the line in terms of what is acceptable, and kind of breaking kind of societal norms and being transgressive is very easy because you've got boys dressed as girls, which can be transgressive. You've got two boys, younger boys kind of dealing with kind of sexual themes, which is, it's brave. And I think Lily definitely is clearly doing that. And I wonder how those plays, I always wonder how those plays went down at the time, because they are, the more you look into it, the more explicit it becomes almost. And I think it's definitely quite easy to do very little as a boys' company and it feel transgressive. And I think you can definitely call back from some of those kind of more explicit themes for the sake of taste, but also because you are working with younger children and you can't push all those elements. When it came to a university play, there is no limits. There isn't anything. You're all kind of young adults. We're used to kind of dealing with content that is explicit and pushing kind of boundaries. And I think at the start, I really wanted to find some way to kind of match that and to push those boundaries. But in fact, I didn't think you could. And I think that there didn't seem to be much point in trying to be transgressive just for the sake of being transgressive. So I think we pulled away from trying to shock the audience. When we did it as a boys' company, I think that was, you couldn't avoid shocking the audience. So it was much more of a topic that maybe we talked about and embraced and were excited about. I'll come back on any of those ideas.
No, that's really great. I guess there's also different kind of stakes involved with a school production, which is a smaller community and a big part of your social world. Whereas there's a little bit more agency with university production, that you're in a bigger institution. If you want to, you can be more anonymous within the wider group. And that maybe gives you more agency in terms of what you can explore, how biographically, autobiographically you might be exploring a play and yourself at the same time. I don't know. there might be something there about different kinds of institutional structures in different kinds of productions, which again raises questions about what on earth Lily might or might not have been doing. You raised the issue of backstory as well, that Galatea begins with this very long scene of backstory. And it does feel like Galatea is distinctive in Lily's work in quite its commitment to a big backstory. And you raised the question just a minute ago of, I wonder how other people reacted to Galatea. And for my money, at least, one way of answering this, and this is not usually my go-to place, but Shakespeare's quite a good place to answer that, because Shakespeare never seems to recover from Galatea. You know, he's always kind of working it through his system from right early on in his career, right through to The Tempest. And for me, The Tempest is a great example of a play kind of chewing on the first scene of Galatea, with the second scene in The Tempest, which is all about a father explaining to his daughter who she is and why she is where she currently is. And crucially, making her be somewhere whilst at the same time telling her that where she is deeply dangerous and terrifying. So, you know, the first line of Galatea, the daughter is told, sit down under this tree and you will feel safe. And by the way, this is where you're going to be sacrificed. It's really weird. So the issues of sexuality and gender for me are grounded in the staging, because from that very first line, a father telling his daughter, be safe here, immediately turns into, this is the most dangerous place you could possibly be. So that feeds for me into all the conversation we've had so far about gender and sexuality. But this is a play offering difficult conversations, but at the same time offering humor. And it sounds like your production was moving away from one and towards the other.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that came from two kind of different elements. So the first was the cast, especially. I don't think believed in my idea that it was funny. I think that I was laughing a lot and they weren't laughing as much. And I think that there's definitely an acting style that we did in Edward's Boys that maybe, as you know, a wink wink, we all know this is a play, we're not really these characters, but then you can kind of subvert that and play with that, and a lot of the humor comes from kind of acknowledging the fact that it's a side wink to the audience. And I think that kind of acting style was alien a little bit, and I think that embodying the characters, and that was what they wanted to do, and come from a more maybe a classical approach. And I think that maybe shifted away from kind of having your cake and eating it in terms of being the character, and also making a joke about the idea of playing the character. So because people wanted to maybe embody those characters more, it became much more of a self-reflective process, and kind of bringing a lot of personal issues and kind of personal struggles into those characters, especially became something that as a cast we became more interested in terms of kind of the way, especially with, you know, with girls being in a production for the first time in the way they weren't when we did the play in Edward's Boys. They had a lot to say about, you know, male gaze, and in terms of kind of what it would be like as a girl to suddenly be in the body of a boy. And that idea is quite funny, but also it's quite interesting in terms of that scene where Philida and Galatea first come out dressed as boys, and they're very much talking about how that feels and how it feels to be dressed as a boy and what they can suddenly do and get away with. And the girls to kind of play with that and explore that became a very interesting idea to them. And it became less funny and I guess more actually thought-provoking. So I think that's probably why the play traveled in that direction.
Yeah, I love the idea of the girls coming out. That's a very resonant way of putting it in relation to this play. And again, that notion that the stage space and the fictional space in this play are really inviting you to think about identity all the time. The girls talk about, if I curtsy here or if I bow here, what am I saying about myself and where do I fit in the social world around me? The kind of the way we inhabit our bodies in relation to gender, and how we then get read by other people, and how we come out or try to pass as particular gender identities is really key, isn't it? George, is it all right if we turn away from Galatea specifically and think more about how Galatea maps onto the kind of wider early modern drama that you've done, which we've already established is quite an eccentric combination of early modern plays. Yeah, either could you contextualize Galatea against the wider work you've done, or just move on to some of that work in and of itself? That's your choice.
Yeah, of course. I think Galatea was definitely the earliest play that I did in terms of kind of chronology, both in terms of when it was written and also it was the first one I did. I think that in terms of the others, I think Lady's Trial was one that I did, and kind of to sum that one up, that was written a bit later, and it's definitely a lot worse. It's not as strong a play. And I don't know if that's related, but there's lots of interesting ideas in that as well about kind of gender, but I don't think it was as interesting. Grobiana's Nuptials was another one that we did, and that was a school play. So it's a play written by an Oxford student, and it was very fun and very silly and very stupid, and it was definitely the most fun to do. And the last significant one that I was involved in was Summer's Last Will and Testament, which I think, in terms of a process, was definitely my favourite one to be involved in, just because it was a play where there wasn't much. It felt like we were breaking new ground. It did. It kind of, there's a lot of resistance to the play that came from the academics before, and that was definitely a challenge that we wanted to rise to and kind of prove people wrong almost. And I think throughout all of them, proving that a play can be funny seems to have been kind of the theme that came through all of them, especially. And I think from the roles that I played, I think that was probably my task, was to be funny in roles that probably you wouldn't expect to be able to be funny in.
Yeah, I'd like to hear more about that. Before we do, just because I have to look my John Ford colleagues in the eye after this video goes live, I want to say that the Lady's Trial, I'm sure, may well be very stageable, and perhaps it's just a combination of sometimes texts don't work, and that's okay, I suppose, and they just need to find the right moment. So yeah, the Lady's Trial is a very weird and difficult play, but then the same has been said about Lily and Summer's Last Will. So you never know, it might have its moment. We shall see. I'm saying that partly because Edward's Boys director Perry Mills made a video with us, which will be out just before the video we're doing with you now, and he too expressed uncertainty about that play. So I feel like I need to wave just a little bit of excited pom-poms at John Ford. But yeah, so Summer's Last Will and Testament. Remind me who you were playing.
I played Winter actually in that. So I had a Winter. He was an embodiment of the season. He was kind of a lawyer figure. Who was Summer, who's kind of this monarch figure representing Elizabeth I. He was kind of the executor of Summer's will. And kind of the inspiration for that was kind of, we went down the Wolf Hall route, and I kind of, especially the BBC production, fed into a lot to how we wanted to kind of embody that character. And kind of Winter is very quiet, and then suddenly he talks for 15 minutes, about 2/3 of the way through the play, and that was a challenge. And that's what my task was. It was to do a 15-minute speech, a 15-minute monologue in a way that was interesting. And in that 15-minute speech, he essentially rallies against everything and everyone. He's a very hateful character, and he hates every single job and profession, and he hates books, and he hates learning, and he hates academics mainly, which was fun.
And that's the part of the play which everyone always thinks is the least stageable. And in your production, I'm pretty confident it's the bit that everyone was talking about most afterwards is the most exciting bit. Maybe we should do a second video where you just give us that speech as a kind of supplementary video. I can be your academic audience for you to be angry about if you like. Can you tell us a bit about what it feels like to work with a long speech like that? I was going to say this later, but I'll say it now just to kind of join some dots. But Galatea as well is a play which is distinctive for having one character who speaks at enormous length. And in Galatea, it's Hebe who is tied to a tree to be sacrificed to this terrifying monster which wants to kill the most beautiful virgin around. And she has this massive speech, as you know, in which she says how awful it is to be so gorgeous. And then everyone's like, where the hell is this monster? And after 10 minutes of hearing about how gorgeous she is, it emerges that she is not sufficiently gorgeous and not the top beauty around. And then she has an almost equally as long a speech about how embarrassing it is to be only the third most beautiful girl around. So yeah, Galatea is a play which is interested in not just long speeches, but because she's tied to a tree, Lily's really interested in giving his longer speeches to characters who can't move. Winter, I think, could move. But yeah, could you tell us what it's like to work with a speech of that length and how you make it work?
It was, I remember looking through the play for the first time, thinking, I don't speak a lot. And then suddenly kind of getting to about 2/3 of the way through, and it was I think 7 pages of dialogue. And at first it was quite terrifying, because that is a mammoth task. And I think it was very, very important for me that I had to learn that speech as quickly as possible, and just make it familiar with myself. And if anything, that was actually the wrong thing to do, because I mean, one of the things that we do in Edward's Boys is kind of read through the play, 10 to 20 times before we kind of start to get it on its feet and start to stage it. And I think a lot of the danger of long speeches is if you just learn it as if it was kind of a monologue in another language, it just becomes repetitive, and it just becomes you're hitting the right beats and the right notes. And I think that was a danger that I nearly fell into, because you want to explore the meaning and kind of the different kind of ebbs and flows of the speech first before you try and learn it. Because although it's a 15-minute speech, it's not an accident that Lily wrote it in that way. And he would have been conscious, not Lily, sorry, Nash wrote it in that way. He would have been conscious, of course, that it was a long speech. And he did things to make it interesting. And I think finding those was the key to starting learning it and then performing it.
Yeah, and if you're looking through the script thinking I don't speak very much, I presume Nash's other intended effect is that the audience are thinking, who the hell's that guy and why isn't he spoken? I mean, there's that character in Waiting for Godot, right, who only has one speech in the entire play, but it goes on forever. And it's sort of an anticipation of that, I think, that to put a body on stage, have them very focal, very important, allegorically super important. It's obvious that you're a key character, but you're not speaking. That suddenly puts a lot of emphasis and weight on everything that you do, every gesture that you take, every posture that you strike. And then suddenly you dominate the stage.
Yeah. And I think it's very similar with Autumn, who also doesn't talk much in the first half. And I guess something that we found very interesting in terms of performance point of view, the first half for me and Jack, who played Autumn, when we didn't speak, was the most exhausting half of performance I've ever done. And it was so hard. And actually it was far easier to be the person talking and kind of being sent to stage. What was really challenging in that play was doing as little as possible, which was something that we found very interesting.
Yeah, I'd like to know the psychology of that. I've done a little bit of work with psychologists around kind of what's happening in terms of neurons in the brain, either when you're on stage or when you're in the audience. But I'm sure that there's good kind of psychological work around the issue of giving a speech and taking focal action, the action which is the main focal point of that particular moment. That stuff can be learned and embodied and put into the brain in a particular way, which the kind of action and stage presence you're describing is much more closer to maybe ad-libbing and is much closer to the moment and can't be learned in quite the same way. So it must be firing up very different parts of the brain, I presume.
I think that's exactly right. And I think that you don't have anything to rely on when you're not doing much. You're just reacting and very present in the moment the whole time. And I think that is probably what's tiring, because it also produces some of the best acting, and we learned a lot because you're learning to react, in the present, in the moment. Whereas when you've got a speech, you're very much relying on what you've done before and rehearse kind of points to hit. Yeah, it is definitely does use a different part of the brain. Must do.
Yeah. George, we're getting towards the end of our conversation now. I've really loved talking to you, and I've learnt tons, so thank you. And one of the most important things for me, as someone who spends quite a lot of my life researching the theatre of this period historically, is that need of moving away from text and thinking that text is the same thing as performance. And I'm really thrilled that we've kind of ended our conversation thinking about performance in the absence of text, and what happens to an actor, what happens to a character, what happens to an audience member when you have someone on stage who is, again, a hugely important part of the choreography of the scene, may even be visually the main part of the scene, but is not speaking. I think it's really, I'm really pleased to have heard about that from you. We're ending these videos by asking our contributors what the word literature means to them, whether it's a good word, an unhelpful word, if it's a word that they use much in their lives. Do you mind telling us a little bit about that word and what it means to you?
Yeah, of course. I think hearing that, I think I responded in probably not a good way. I don't think it is a particularly helpful word for me, just because I think it puts a limit maybe on what words can be. I think maybe it constrains them, and I think when you have a look at that literature or read some literature, I think it's definitely, as you grow up, it doesn't have particularly positive connotations. So just instinctively, I think it probably is quite unhelpful to me. I think that in terms of all the best text I've read, maybe I'd use the word text rather than literature. I don't know. I love reading. I love books. I love plays. But the word literature, I don't know. That's probably how I'd respond to that.
That's great. Thank you very much. I can't quite believe the range of early modern drama we've covered. That's extraordinary. Yeah, that's lots of food for thought. So thank you very much for this conversation.
No problem. It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Take care.